Good morning, it's Deljit Singh, and it's early in the morning, it's 6 o'clock here in the city centre. In 2021, we put together a couple of videos, a couple of films about Peterborough. Well, thank you to the tens of thousands of you that watched those. Really humbled by that, and also the comments from all around the world from people who've watched them. Some of you actually lived in Peterborough, some of you actually learned about Peterborough, but what you said was really, really encouraging. In fact, so much so, we're back doing a Magical History Tour number 3, and that's Peterborough City Centre. I'm up by Borges Boulevard here. This car park was actually the site of a pub, the 8 Bells. Hang on, you're saying, whoa, stop, Del. 8 Bells, surely you mean 6 Bells. You already dropped a clanger, you just started. No, this was originally the 8 Bells. So back in 1856, a pub was established here called the 8 Bells Inn. As it happens, 20 years later, the owner of that there pub took the name up to another pub on Lincoln Road, and therefore it became the 6 Bells Inn. It remained the 6 Bells Inn after that for over 100 plus years. In fact, I used to frequent the place as the 6 Bells in the 1970s, really primarily to get away from uncles and others that might recognise me in pubs down Cromwell Road. So at a pool table, it was a great place to kind of hang around and play. It was really close to the city centre and it was pretty good. It actually operated as 6 Bells for a good number of years, up until about 1993 when it became the Rat and Carrot. Yeah, I'm trying to work out what the connection was there as well. But it became a bit of a biker's pub, had bands, music in there, and that continued for a little while, up until the announcement of the North Westgate development, at which point the place was pretty much closed down around sort of a little bit later. In fact, it actually reverted back to the 6 Bells, if I'm not mistaken, in around 2000. And about 2002, it finally was boarded up, closed, and demolished and turned into this fabulous bastion of automotive parking, a car park. So here we are outside the Brewery Tap. Now this is thankfully a pub that's still here. Opened in 1998 by Paul Hook and the Oakham Ales team. On-site brewery, great food, plus entertainment night spot, and it's still going strong. But I'm interested in the building before it became the Brewery Tap. Because before it became the Brewery Tap, and my memories of this building back in the 1970s was as Peterborough Labour Exchange. Some of you are thinking, what's a labour exchange? Well, actually, it was kind of like the forerunner of job centres. It's where people would come to get employment. There's not really a massive amount that tells you it used to be a labour exchange, but there are a couple of telltale signs. Just behind me, above that door, is a sign saying employers. So this is where employers would actually enter the building looking to hire a workforce. And a little bit further along, on the other side, is another door which has the word juveniles over the top of it. So these were school leavers, people looking for their first job, and they would queue at that door there. And around the other side, obviously, the sign's gone now above the door, but there was probably the sign for regular folks that were slightly older workforce. So that's what this place was, a job centre. It is actually an amazing building, a lot of history behind it. And I say, it's been spared from that development of North Westgate, and it will carry on as a Brewery Tap. But for me, it will always be the Labour Exchange. Okay, so here I'm on Westgate. I have memories of this place dating back to the 1970s, so around 1978. And the main reason for that was, you can tell from my hairstyle, I wasn't really one of the regular congregation here, but what I did do was come to the youth club that used to be around the back here. So back in those days when we had youth clubs, many were church affiliated, not that you actually had to be a member of the church or of that religion even, but they just catered for the youth of the day. And the club around the corner was actually Pilots. So I used to remember coming there with your 5p, which bought you a cup of warm orange squash and an arrowroot biscuit. But you got a chance to play ping pong and table football and do all those things, just get you off the street. So it was pretty good. So that was kind of round the corner there. Strangely enough, many years later, when I got engaged, my dad hired the hall, and that was a kind of cheap engagement party, but it was so I have some memories of this place. It actually has had a couple of fires here over the years as well, but it's been restored. It's now still operating as a church. It's now found a new lease of life. Obviously, as you can see, it's populations from overseas, so you've got Portuguese and other communities. It still operates as a church and it's very full. It's a Sunday, so we're going to have to film quickly and get out before the congregation arrive. Okay, so behind me is Queensgate bus station, or what's being left of it. This whole thing is being kind of redeveloped at the moment. In fact, it's 40 years this year since Queensgate opened in Peterborough. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But in the meantime, there used to be, pre-Queensgate, shops along here. Quite a few shops, very small, quaint shops. There was the newsagents, but the one that stuck out for me in my head is Ron's, a gents hairdresser. Again, it's not a place I would frequent with a hairstyle like mine, but gents did, to get their short back and sides, and something for the weekend. You've got to be of a certain age to understand that last statement. But Ron's is quite interesting, because when Queensgate arrived, Ron's actually moved to New Road as a hairdresser, but he also found a sideline in repairing razors and shavers. The electric shaver was a big thing back then. And Ron then became Ron Rudkins, and I think that might still be up on St Paul's Road. Shaver repairs, electrical repairs, and so on. So a number of shops that used to be here are no more. Gave way to Queensgate, gave way to the bus station, but some really amazing memories. Okay, so talking of history, this place is really historic. Up on Westgate here, this building is now the Wortley Arms, but it was established back in 1744 by Edward Wortley. He was MP for the city, and it became a workhouse. Now, workhouse was somewhere where basically people, the poor, the needy, could actually get work, but they had to work for their money, and workhouse had quite a bad reputation, not being kind of a lot of intolerable cruelty going on there. So there were two workhouses, this one here plus one on Cumbergate, and with the opening of a bigger, probably even worse, workhouse up on Thorpe Road, in 1837 this actually became an almshouse. An almshouse was somewhere where the poor and needy who were elderly, disabled, infirm could actually find some kind of food, a place to shelter, etc. So that's what this place was. It's got a lot of history. Now, the interesting story behind it, possible bit of urban folklore and legend, is that one, Charles Dickens, used to frequent the city and used to come here time to time, and in the 1830s stopped by here and drew inspiration for Oliver Twist. So did he see somebody asking for more and getting beaten and not getting their gruel? Who knows? But it was quite interesting to know. I'm sure there were workhouses nearer to him in London, but maybe he saw something here, it inspired him, maybe he modelled some stuff and some characters. It'd be nice to think that Peterborough played a part in that Dickens legacy here. But this place laid empty for quite a number of years, and then with the development at Queensgate, the building, as a listed building, was put back to good use and has been operating as the Wortley Arms pub. And thankfully, because it's a listed building, even with the North Westgate development, it will continue to be a part of our history in the city. Okay, so behind me here on Westgate, it's the banyan tree now. It used to be Bar Block, but let's go back, way back to the 1900s. The Royal Hotel, one of Peterborough's premier hotels, really. That's what this place was. If you see some old photos, you might even see that there's an old concrete block here, which is where the same stairs leading up to it, but it's very different now. It got Grade 2 listed status building in 1952, so it escaped the bulldozers of Queensgate. Just the other side of the Royal Hotel, sadly, it did fall to the bulldozers of Queensgate, was Queen Street. And Queen Street was a street that led over to Perkins Engines, who were basically on site there, a number of other shops there. And as we celebrate 40 years of Queensgate, buried underneath Queensgate, probably roughly where that John Lewis's employees' entrance was, where Queen Street would have been, is no more. So underneath there is a lot of history of what used to be Queen Street, now underneath Queensgate. It's amazing what you learn walking around here. Absolutely no idea. I've walked past this place hundreds of times over the years. I actually did not see that up on the wall there. The fact, there's a little plaque there about Deacon School. The fact Deacon School, established in 1722, stood on a site nearby from here from 1883 through to 1960s. So yeah, Deacons, I always knew Deacons being up sort of Park Road, up that part of the world, but obviously Deacons originally was not far from here. But it's amazing, it's just one of those things about, we are surrounded by such history. We just got to keep looking up occasionally and taking note. Okay, so most people know Millfield, they know New England, but this top end of Lincoln Road and Westgate is Boroughbury. So I know Boroughbury from back in the 1970s, particularly this top corner here, just behind me, Johnson's Corner, because effectively there were shops there was a newsagents there. It was a small, you heard the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it was actually the Leaning Newsagents of Peterborough. It was this little rickety shop that was there, and it wasn't just the walls that were leaning, because we walked inside and it was like literally walking uphill because the floors were uneven too. But it was quite a beautiful little shop, very small, and it had a very distinct smell about it of newsprint. It was like if somebody just gave you fresh newspapers, you got that waft of papers. It was a stationers, a booksellers, a newsagents, and tobacconists too. And I have a personal story. So back in the 1970s, my father was opening a business, and he was after this publication called Trader, and it listed all the wholesalers around the UK. And I tried everywhere in Peterborough to get a copy of this magazine. Couldn't find it. Deljit Smith said, "Oh yeah, sign up for 6 months and we'll get one for you." I remember stopping in there, and the gentleman, I said, "I don't suppose you heard of Trader?" And he dived under the counter, emerged a few minutes later with this magazine. And he said, "You can have this because it's a couple of months old." Actually, I didn't tell my dad this, but I used the money to buy a copy of the Beano, the Dandy, some sweets. And I told him I paid for the magazine, so sorry, Dad. But it was amazing. This Aladdin cave of publications and magazines, and that was Johnson's Corner. Okay, so here we are on where Johnson's Corner would have been, where that newsagents was. I said, unfortunately, it's a car park now. There's not a lot left of it. It was still a listed building back in 1973. Unfortunately, because of the condition of the building, because it was really quite rickety and very dangerous, even the listed status didn't save it, and it was demolished. And sadly, it doesn't exist anymore. But behind me, there was also quite an amazing building, a business. It was Burroughs Motors. And Burroughs Motors was the first Volkswagen dealership. I had some amazing memories of that because around the 1970s, one of the big kind of cars that was still really, really popular, I think it was possibly because there were a number of movies came out that around about this racing VW Beetle called Herbie. And Herbie rides and Herbie rides again, and Herbie goes to Monte Carlo. And so you had these, up on ramps, you'd have a VW Beetle with number 53 on it. And I could still visualize in my head on Burroughs Motors forecourt, a Beetle looking like Herbie there. But my favourite story of Burroughs Motors was actually a VW camper van. I'd never seen a VW camper van in real. I'd seen them on films and so on, generally with surfboards and stuff sticking out of them. But I remember a school friend of mine, sadly not with us anymore, and I saw this VW camper van, their forecourt, and had to go and have a quick look inside. And the gentleman said we could come and have a look at it. And lovely when he opened it up, and it had, you know, the seats that turned into beds. It had a little sink in there, and it had the roof that kind of extended up so you could stand up inside it, and it was like, you know, it's like a party bus, and that was amazing. So that was Burroughs Motors. Okay, so up on Lincoln Road here. As a child, I was actually a bit of a sickly child, and these days I'm a sickly adult, but I was a sickly child, so I spent a lot of time in this building behind me, which was a doctor's surgery, and it was Dr. Kasky and Dr. Steele. In fact, Dr. Steele was the lovely gentleman that brought me into this world, had delivered me, and it was a medical practice which then moved from here to North Street, just opposite, at which point, and sadly Dr. Steele passed away, and it was Dr. John Gordon and Dr. Kasky Senior, I should say, who took on that practice. They then later moved to the Park Medical Centre, which is still there today. Okay, the shops here on Lincoln Road have really changed, and I mean really changed. So now, yep, you've got a snack bar, you've got internet cafe, something that obviously in the 70s, across the way there was P.S. Willis and Son. P.S. Willis were actually electrical shops. So before you had all these big B&Qs and places, the DIY stores, you bought all the electrical stuff, your bulbs, wires, plugs, lamps from P.S. Willis. Next door to them you had the carpet shop, and you actually had in fact, actually there's a music shop there, if I remember. There's a music shop and a carpet shop, so the landscape was very different. For me, one of my favourites, just behind me up the road here, probably that sign is, the burger place, was the Kona Bar Cafe. It was actually a cafe, but it was also a milk bar. I know, milk bar? But yeah, it was one of these places you'd go to. It was the first place I think I got a proper milkshake, where they had these big machines, big white machines that dispensed milk, and they'd make you this really frothy milkshake. But the reason I actually liked the place was it had a jukebox. It had a really good jukebox. So I could go in there, along with my school friends, sit there and actually listen to the music. They weren't that much into the music, I was. They actually liked the pinball machine. There was a good one in there as well. In fact, when he got really good at it, he used to tilt, and he always lost your money on there. But look, it was really, really great. So that's what we had. We had cafes back then, not burger joints. This is all pre-McDonald's, pre those fast food joints. And you had these brilliant little cafes, and the Kona Bar was just an example. So like I say, very different to what it looks like today. Behind me is quite a famous, iconic watering hole. It's now the Ostrich. In fact, it was the Ostrich Inn back in the 1800s. So around 1837 is when this place originally opened as the Ostrich Inn. And it had some really famous patrons during the 1900s when artists would perform in Peterborough. People like Charlie Chaplin, Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy fame. They'd pop in here after the show for a quick half or a slow half, depending on what they felt like, I suppose. And it stayed as a pub for a good number of years. It was probably around the 1970s, late 80s, when it closed down as a pub and it became a homebrew shop. I remember coming here to buy some brewer's yeast for my dad for his beers. He'd made some awful beers, I have to say. They weren't very palatable, but it stayed as a homebrew shop for a little while, but then it reopened as Bogart's. So a lot of people in the local entertainment scene will know Bogart's as a pub, live bands, ales, etc. Throughout the 1990s, and it's now gone back to its original name again in 2009 of the Ostrich Inn. So again, it's nice that not all the pubs around here are kind of disappearing and closing. The one thing I've learned from making these films is that it's been great to recount my stories, but the thing that I've loved the most is actually hearing other people's stories. The feedback that I've received, that Peterborough Presents has received by people watching these films is amazing. I've learned a great deal about other people's experiences of my city. So I'm delighted to share that, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. And I do want people to share this stuff, because there are people that are disparaging and negative about the city when they needn't be. Honestly, if you look around, there's some really good stuff you can say about the city. Just an experience, a story. I do hope you'll share some of your stories with us when you watch this, because there's a wonderful history about this city. I mean, I've learned stuff just walking around today that I wasn't aware of, because, as I said, if you look up as opposed to down, you're always going to see something new. And if you listen to people, you'll always hear something that's of interest. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for asking for more of these. We'll oblige if you keep watching and you keep sharing and you keep telling us that you enjoy magical history tours of Peterborough. Thank you.